The Zephyrian Empire had ruled the Andromeda sector for 3 millennia, their crystalline towers stretching across 100 worlds like frozen lightning. Their society was built on order, hierarchy, and the absolute certainty that chaos was the enemy of civilization. So when Captain Sarah Chen's battered cargo vessel limped into their space with a hold full of refugees from the Kepler Wars, the Zephyrians saw only one thing: a violation of their sacred borders. Quarantine Protocol 77 Alpha, announced Magistrate Kethvar, his 6 arms moving in practiced precision across the control interface. The human ship was tractored into Detention Station Omega-9, a fortress of black metal that had held dissidents and criminals for 8 centuries. Standard procedure for contamination threats. What the Zephyrians didn't understand was that humans weren't just another species to be catalogued and contained. They were something far more dangerous. They were adapters. Sarah's first day in Naoim, the cell was spent mapping every surface with her fingertips, testing the strength of the energy barriers and listening to the subtle hum of the station's systems. By the second day, she had identified 17 separate mechanical frequencies and begun to understand the rhythm of guard rotations. By the third day, she was teaching the Kepler refugees, a mixture of humans and allied species, how to turn their imprisonment into something else entirely. The Zephyrians see order as strength, Sarah explained to the gathered prisoners in the common area, her voice barely above a whisper. But order has patterns, and patterns can be predicted, adapted to, and eventually redirected. Dr. Marcus Webb, the elderly physician who had been treating wounded refugees, looked skeptical. Sarah, this is a maximum security facility. The walls are made of molecularly bonded tritanium. The guards have weapons that can disintegrate matter at the quantum level. Sarah smiled, that peculiar human expression that had puzzled alien anthropologists for decades. Marcus, you're thinking like them. You're seeing walls and weapons and impossibilities. I'm seeing something else entirely. She gestured to the diverse group around them. Humans, yes, but also Kelton empaths who could sense emotional resonance across vast distances, Rygan engineers whose 6-dimensional thinking had revolutionized hyperspace travel, and Thex negotiators whose silver tongues had ended wars. I'm seeing the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, a motivated community with complementary skills. Over the following weeks, something unprecedented began to happen in Detention Station Omega-9. The prisoners started organizing, not in the crude, violent way that uprisings typically began, but with the methodical patience that only humans seemed to possess. The Kelton empaths began mapping the emotional states of the guards, identifying patterns of stress, boredom, and discontent. The Rygan engineers studied the station's power distribution systems during their monitored work, details, memorizing every junction and conduit. The Thex negotiators started casual conversations with younger guards, planting seeds of doubt about the Empire's policies. And Sarah? Sarah began writing. She wrote on scraps of nutrition packaging, on the walls of her cell with a makeshift stylus, on any surface that could hold words. She wrote about the principles that had driven humanity to the stars, that freedom wasn't a privilege to be granted, but a right to be claimed. That diversity wasn't weakness but strength multiplied. That cooperation wasn't submission, but the highest form of civilization. The guards, initially amused by the humans' scribbling, began to read her words during their rounds. Some dismissed them as primitive ramblings. Others found themselves pausing, thinking, questioning assumptions they had never questioned before. Magistrate Kethavar first noticed the problem when Guard Captain Veltar requested a meeting about ethical concerns regarding indefinite detention. The magistrate's crystalline features darkened as he realized that exposure to human ideas was spreading like a virus through his facility. Implement isolation protocols, he ordered. No more common areas. No more group activities. Complete separation. But it was already too late. The night the isolation order was to be implemented, something extraordinary happened. The station's lights dimmed as the Rygan engineers activated power rerouting sequences they had been memorizing for weeks. Emergency systems failed as Kelton, Empaths coordinated with sympathetic guards who had been swayed by months of patient conversation. Security protocols crumbled as Thek's negotiators turned the station's own communication systems against it. And at the center of it all was Sarah. Chen, no longer just a prisoner, but the focal point of something the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered: a peaceful revolution. The detention cells opened not through violence or force, but through choice. Guards who had spent months reading Sarah's writings chose to step aside. Officers who had been gradually convinced by Thek's negotiators chose to disable weapons systems. Even some Zephyrian civilians on nearby stations, who had heard whispers of the humans' ideas through clandestine communications, chose to support the prisoners' cause. When the station's final security barriers fell, Sarah stood in the command center facing Magistrate Kethvar. The Zephyrian's 6 arms trembled with rage and fear. "You have destroyed everything," he accused. "Our order, our stability, our way of life." Sarah shook her head gently. "We haven't destroyed anything. We've shown your people that there's something better than order imposed from above. There's order chosen from within. There's freedom." As news of the peaceful liberation spread across Zephyrian space, something unprecedented began to happen. Citizens who had lived under rigid hierarchy for millennia started asking questions. Why were there detention stations for refugees? Why wasn't dissent allowed? Why had they never been permitted to choose their own leaders? The Zephyrian Empire had jailed one human to maintain their perfect order. Instead, they had unleashed an idea that would transform their civilization forever. That freedom once glimpsed cannot be contained. Sarah Chen and her fellow refugees were eventually released, not through force of arms, but through the force of an awakened populace demanding change. The Zephyrian Empire didn't fall. It evolved, becoming something unprecedented, a society that chose its own path. And in the history books of 100 worlds, scholars would note that the greatest revolution in galactic history began not with weapons or armies, but with a human who refused to stop writing about freedom, even in the darkest of prisons.